Is CJ's on the Verge.
Good evening, I'm Stone Malone, and here is a quote for you right off the bat. If you wait by the river long enough, the bodies of your enemies will float by. I want you to think about that, and my guest tonight will explain a bit later in the show what that means. And speaking of my guest, sit back, relax, enjoy, because we've got him for a full hour this evening, kind of a retrospective show from the ashes of Age of Electric. This is Static and Stereo on the Verge, Calgary's best rock, CJAY92. Calgary's best rock, CJAY92. That's Before My Time from Static and Stereo. And frontman Todd Kerns joining me in the studio tonight. How you doing, big man?
I'm good.
Good. Nice to have you here.
It's good to be back in the big city.
In the woods.
In the
Well, the lack of woods, actually.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
It's familiar territory for me, so it's all good.
Well, right off the bat, let's talk about the quote that I just mentioned. I'll repeat it again in case somebody missed that intro. If you wait by the river long enough, the bodies of your enemies will float by. Pulled that from your bio.
Yeah, that's actually an old Indian, Native American thing that somebody threw at me when I was complaining about like how long it was taking to make the record, and I've written a million songs here, and then somebody said that to me, and I just it kind of froze me for a second, and there was never any explanation of, well, what this means, Todd, is.
Oh.
So to me, it was a lot more of like I took away from it, sort of just knowing when to, when to strike. I guess
strike.
I think it was a reference to the when to go to war and all that sort of thing, and knowing that there's a proper time to do that and not to sort of jump the gun, because that's really the way it felt with this record. There was a lot of no matter how long we sort of hammered on it, or how long we sort of, or how hard we pushed it, it just sort of like, when it was ready, it was going to be ready, and it was just a matter of sort of like going with the flow.
And you guys also produced this album along with a guy named Steve Drake, is that right?
Yes.
Tell us about it. What's his story?
Well, he is one of the front guys from the great, now defunct Odds from Vancouver.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, he was like one of those guys that between him and Craig Northey, the other main songwriter in the band, are like two of the most revered guys in the city for songwriting, for production, arranging. They're constantly getting from every artist in the country. It's the men. To mention Craig or Steven, it's like, yeah, bring it on. Mm-hmm. So when he was his name was mentioned, I was like, I've always loved his music. The Odds were a pretty poppy band in a sense, so we went out for some beers with him, and it was sort of a, he had this sort of really real need to make a rock and roll record, and I think we sort of said, well, looks like we're your guinea pigs today. So,
and the rest is history. Record it where?
At Greenhouse. It's the folks that own the old Little Mountain, the legendary Little Mountain studio, where bands like Aerosmith and Motley Crue and all that. This is it's a different location, but it's the same people who ran it. So
okay, and another familiar name in this project as well. The guy who mixed it, Jeff Martin.
Yeah, Jeff was also he was slated to do some producing at one point, and the record he just put out, Triptych, the last record, the last one before the Greatest Hits thing. And the thing exploded and took off, and then it was sort of a question of, do we wait for this guy? I mean, I'd known him a long time. He's a good friend. Mm-hmm. And we just said, well, and then that's when Steven's name came up, and it sort of seemed like a good idea to move forward as opposed to waiting. So at the end of it all, when it became time to find someone to mix, Jeff was the first guy I called. And with him and his guy, Nick Blagona, is the guy that he does his stuff with. So they grabbed the ball and ran.
Okay. Is Jeff known to do that with other bands as well? Is he?
No, I think we're one of the first projects. I mean, that's something he really aspires to do, and I think he will have a great future in that, is to get behind the desk for other artists. Because, he does great work with the Tea Party, but people don't necessarily take an artist, seriously as a producer when they produce themselves. So I think it's kind of frustrating for him. So this is, I think, one of the first things he stepped in and done something outside of that. So I think it's really good for him.
Okay. All right, let's go back in time for a bit, as we promised we would.
The Vietnam flashback. Whoa.
Yeah. What happened to the Age of Electric, the former band?
Well, it's one of those things, we were together a long time, and this city would probably remember it better than anybody else. I mean, we had spent, a long time before we ever started, we ever had a record deal or anything like that. We were sort of selling records and, I guess, cassettes at that time off of the stage, and making videos for, a couple of $1,000, and Much Music was crazy enough to play them. But I mean, it's one of those funny things. You know, we've been together so long. I kind of liken it to being a marriage. You know, it's like you're together for a long time. Suddenly, you have a house and you have two-car garage and you have all the things you ever wanted. But you kind of realize that that the marriage itself isn't really what you want anymore. And I think that sort of happened to us, and it's kind of unfortunate because I think we kind of started to attain all the things we'd worked towards. Yet it was the four of us that were sort of. We'd grown apart as adults. I mean, the time you spend from the time you're like 17 until you're 25 or whatever, you're not necessarily the same person. The things you want, they change, and I think that really happened. And we had all kinds of outside problems too. With we started to get silly with our side projects and other projects, and all the other things that life sort of throws your way. Suddenly, it became. That the mothership itself, the Age of Electric, was suffering because of it. At the end of the day, I felt like I was the last guy kind of standing there going, kind of like with my hands, up in the air going, I don't know, because guys are doing this and guys are doing that. And John, my brother, was just like pretty much fed up with the entire thing. And then there was some discussion for a short time of maybe sort of trying to carry it on in some fashion or another and maybe different people. But when I really sort of took the step back, I really sort of said to myself, I would rather see the Age of Electric put to bed on this high note than sort of drag it through the mud or make the mistake of sort of, of it, making a mistake, and then sort of retiring it because it needed to be retired, as opposed to retiring it because it was a good time for it just to be put to bed.
And now currently 3 brothers in the band. That's the full family?
That's all my brothers.
That's all the brothers.
Yeah.
How's that? On the road? Fights?
We
brotherly love like the Osmonds maybe?
Yeah, I know people always sort of throw wonderful. The Osmonds or the Moffats kind of reference. Our reference is always more Corleone, or there's in organized crime. There's always sort of a more family aspect to it. So I think that has a lot to do with. I always question that. Why would you bring your brother into organized crime? But I think it's a lot of to do with trust and knowing that who you can bank on and who's going to be there for you. And I think that's a lot of what's kind of great about this. John and I have been together, we've been playing together a long time.
Since the Kiss days, really, in the basement, maybe.
Exactly. That's exactly. And Ryan, it wasn't like a real conscious decision for Ryan to come in and play guitar, my brother Ryan. It was sort of, he was sleeping on my couch and loitering and eating my food in Vancouver. And then we'd jam together and, come up with some ideas. And then it was sort of like when the time presented itself, it was like, it was a natural thing. Let's just, take these songs we've been coming up with and demo them.
Okay. You talk about your parents. A big thank you on the Static and Stereo album to your parents, who met in an interesting place.
Yeah. Yeah, they'd met in Ponoka, Alberta, actually.
Okay.
At the institution they have up there, the hospital. The mental institute is, I'm trying to figure out a nice way to say it, but it's a mental institute.
Right.
And they were both psych nurses, and that was where it met, and where they met, and they sort of, so we've always kind of had a laugh about that and we always kind of like, are you sure one of you wasn't a patient, perhaps? Or perhaps both, I don't know. But, so Dad didn't really stay at that. Mom remained an RN, but Dad, back in those days, it was, Cuckoo's Nest, the movie was a lot of like, male nurses were bouncers, essentially, in places like that. So.
Exactly. And then, so where would you call home? Saskatchewan, that's home base?
Well, we refer to it as home. I mean, I've been living in Vancouver for a long time, so that is home no matter what. But I think that the strangest thing is that our parents retired. They moved away from our hometown of Lanigan, outside of Saskatoon. They retired to Saskatoon now. So in a funny way, those ties have really been cut from the town itself of Lanigan. There's never, it's kind of, we have to find reasons to go back there. I haven't been back in a long time. So now all of a sudden, officially, I feel that Vancouver has become my home. Although Saskatoon, Saskatchewan and Calgary and this whole area, all the way out to Winnipeg, all the prairies always felt like, because we'd spent all of our time playing out here, most of our record sales would happen in here, and all of our friends live in here, that this always sort of feels like home. Every place from Saskatoon, Regina, Winnipeg, Calgary, Edmonton will all claim us as their own band, as well as Vancouver. Vancouver would claim Age of Electric as their own band because of just being in there all the time. We played all those areas so much. So to me, I always sort of felt like, when you live that sort of gypsy lifestyle, then there really is no reason to call anything home because you live out of a hotel room anyway.
Yeah.
But Saskatchewan's where the roots are, you know.
I'm in studio tonight with Static and Stereo frontman Todd Kerns, and let's go back in history just a little bit to 1998 when the band was known as The Age of Electric, and the album was Make a Pest a Pet. The track Remote Control, here it is on the Verge, Calgary's Best Rock, CJAY92. Calgary's Best Rock, CJAY92, that's Heathrow 4 a.m. from Static in Stereo. I'm Stone Malone in studio tonight with frontman Todd Kerns. All right, let's hang out in the present for a while now. Interesting object on the cover of the new CD. I'm checking it out here. What is that exactly?
That is an artist rendering of the name Static and Stereo.
Okay.
We had kind of tossed around the idea of what to do with an album cover, and the artist had sort of, you know, he sort of threw this thing at us like, I had this idea of this, you know, machine in a, you know, sort of Blade Runner-esque post-apocalyptic blah, blah, you know. And I was like, well, if the name itself or the record itself is moving this artist to come up with something, then go nuts, man. And he sort of sent it to us, and it was like, wow, this thing's pretty crazy. It kind of reminds me of, you know, it has this sort of Blade Runner-ish kind of sci-fi thing to it. But then I also think it would be great to have the budget and be playing the size of places now where we could do like the Funkadelic thing where it would be like the mothership coming down from the ceiling, you know, we could step off of it.
That would be very cool.
But, you know, the size of venues we're playing right now, it would probably just be ridiculous. But that in itself, I mean, the fact that we made a record that was sort of heavily sort of based in the music we grew up on and the 70s and that sort of thing, I think that the idea of the artwork sort of having almost a bit more of a tech, futuristic almost thing to me, and the record opens with some crazy digitally assaulted guitar noises that itself sort of has this sort of futuristic sound to it. My idea was always sort of like, I want it to be sort of based in music that, you know, from back in the day, but at the same time, I don't want any sort of novelty or retro sort of stamp on it. I want it to be very sort of relevant today and moving forward. So the futuristic aspects, I think, the sci-fi-ness of it, sort of, that's kind of where that comes from, I think.
And if you've seen the video for Before My Time, of course, that object is in throughout the video, along with a giant baby.
And a giant baby.
Yeah.
That kid's going to be huge when he Yeah. I think he's already signed for the Raptors. I don't know. But, yeah, that... it's funny because the original sort of concept of the video was the director as well was moved by Static and Stereo and the song and the record, and he had this idea of a giant stereo thing. And we said, well, we got this cool thing on the cover of our record that this guy's making. Oh, and it all kind of was all tying in somehow. Right. It's tied into the website now. It's all sort of as if it was meant to be. More times than not, these things are just kind of complete happenstance, but but that's okay.
And if you haven't seen the video, it's on Much Music, full rotation, I believe. And also on your website, you can check out the full video on there, along with backstage footage of the making of the video.
Yeah. There's actually, we try and be as current as possible on that thing and keep up on it. We haven't done a lot of postings yet, but we've been filming a lot of things here and there. Our last trip out there, we did a bit of behind-the-scenes stuff, too.
I'll give you the honors of plugging that site.
www.staticandstereo.com.
There you go.
The funny thing is, in the last band and stuff like that, there was no internet stuff to really be sort of, the idea of having our own website seemed like, what are we in the future here?
Yeah.
Buck Rogers?
Now it's just part of the marketing.
Now it's just,
side of it.
Yeah.
Quickly, let's talk about best gig, worst gig. Any kind of story come to mind over the years?
Geez.
Probably be a best gig. I don't think there's such a thing as a worst gig, is there?
I think I could probably put them both into one show. I remember the last show we played as Age of Electric was, big arena show opening for Our Lady Peace. And, here we were at the pinnacle. We had reached the thing, we were playing arenas, we're doing the thing, and it's the last show. So I remember kind of like having this really sort of like melancholy, sort of surreal, bittersweet thing about like, well, we're here and we're leaving. So I wouldn't say it was the worst, in as much as sort of like, other things where, tearing my pants on stage, which happened a number of times, or, and, things like that. But we've had a lot of great gigs that way. So the Edge Fest things and outdoor things can be a blast. Playing to like, upwards of 20,000 people is always is amazing.
Yeah,
so
it must be.
And we're really excited about doing it this year. So I think the best ones are ahead of us. And probably the worst ones, too. I don't know.
Who knows, right?
Hopefully not, but
I'd say the best ones are ahead of you.
Yeah.
I'm Stone Malone. I'm in studio tonight with the frontman for Static in Stereo, Mr. Todd Kerns. The debut album,